right, everyone, we're on to sort of our next section. Now, this is something we have discussed in sort of the Word module, but we're also discussing here now. And what is that concept? Well, that concept is the notion of tables, right? So, as always, before we even get into sort of the units, what do we think tables are in PowerPoint, right? Like, what do we think? What's the purpose of tables in PowerPoint? Why would we even want to use them, right? So we'll give it 2 to 3 minutes to really just think about that and sort of have an answer. But why would we even want to use tables in PowerPoint? What's the point, right? What do we think? We could see the appeal in Word, right? But why do we have tables in PowerPoint, everyone? What do we think? What do we think? What do we think? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? All right. Well, tables again, PowerPoints, as I've repeatedly mentioned, PowerPoints is primarily a visual medium, right? And what tables allow us to do is it allows us to sort of do a really efficient job at organizing a lot of information in a very succinct, I guess, structure. Oops, let me turn my camera back on. Right? If we think about it, like say like if in a presentation we're doing like the new company schedule, right? So the days certain individuals are slotted into work, right? We could, of course, use a table to display that. Maybe we could show potential outcomes or maybe some sort of visual like description that we could use the columns in a table to express. Well, we can use that, right? Basically, that is to say, tables are a very, very efficient way of sort of showing a lot of information, especially ones that are sort of comparative or need a specific structure like a schedule, right? And honestly, sky's really the limit with tables, right? You can legitimately do a lot with them. And honestly, learning about them in any sort of application you work with that's sort of reliant on information, like let's say like Word, we learned it in Word, and we're going to learn in PowerPoint. It's pretty important to learn, right? To be honest. Now we're moving on. So let's get into it. So tables are another tool we can use to display in information in PowerPoint. A table is a grid of cells arranged in what we call sort of rows and columns, and they are useful for various tasks, including presenting text information and numerical data. We can even customize tables to fit your presentation. To insert a table, from the Insert tab, we click the Table command. Hover the mouse over the grid of squares to select the desired amount of rows and columns in the table. In our example, we're inserting a table with 6 rows and 6 columns. Then the tables will appear on the currently selected slide. In this case, it's slide 3. Then we can click anywhere in the table and begin typing to add text. So we can also use the Tab key or the arrow keys on your keyboard to navigate through the table, right? So let's go back here. Let's create a new slide and let's go insert, right? And we go table. Let's just do something like this, right? Obviously, if you remember, we have the various settings, but we can go sorry, very tired. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Let's just center this text. And there you go, right? So you could do whatever, right? That's how you create it. So how do we do it again? Just to show you. Insert, table, select our dimensions, and then just release and insert. If you do need more options, like a bigger table, you could manually calibrate how big you want your table to be with the insert table sort of button here, right? And that'll allow you to give like a little bit more control over the sizing and whatever to sort of really do it. Now we're modifying tables, right? So we provide several options for sort of customizing tables, including moving and resizing, as well as adding rows and columns. So to move and resize, of course, we can click on it, right? And then we can just drag on an edge and then move it around. We can also resize it, right? So we can click and drag the sizing handles until the table is sort of the correct size we want it to be. So again, here, move it around. And now also we can drag it to sort of change sizing. Okay, so now here's our other question. Given what we remember about Word, in terms of adding columns and rows to a table, how would we go about doing it in PowerPoint, everyone? How could I add additional rows and columns in PowerPoint? How could I go about doing so, everyone? How could I do that? Again, we'll give it like 3 to 3.5 minutes. But how would I go about adding sort of additional rows and columns to this table? Does anyone remember the process? Does anyone remember? What do you think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think, everyone? Well, let's do it. So let's give it a try. So remember, it's pretty simple, I'd say. Nothing too complex in nature, hopefully. But again, we could go to table, not table design, this table layout, right? And we can insert from here, right? So insert row above, insert row below, right? We can insert a column to the left of where our cursor is, to the right. Alternatively, another thing we can definitely do is, oh, they don't have, oh yes, that's right here. So we right click and then we have our insert, and then it's the same sort of options there, right? So generally pretty easy, I'd say. But again, it is, I'm hoping a lot of us did remember, because it was, I think it was the longest covered sort of topic when we did Word, right? Tables, right? Because it genuinely is very important, or at least that's my belief. That sort of tables are very important in the context of like mediums like Word or even PowerPoint, right? But that's how you insert the column. So now let's go on a slide that explains that. So to add a row or column, right, we click the cell adjacent to a location where we want to add a row or column. In our example, we'll select the cell that says mystery. Then we click on the layout tab on the right side of the ribbon, right? We locate the rows and columns group. And if we want to insert a new row, we select either insert above or insert below. And then if we want to insert a new column, we can do insert left or insert right, which is what we sort of went over, right? But again, we can click here, and then again, let's just assume we're here. We click, go to table layout, and again, insert sort of, it's all here, so we can select wherever. Alternatively, another thing we can do is sort of insert left to the right, above and below as well, and that will work, right? And that's sort of inserting. In all honesty, if you know how to basically insert like if you insert, how do I say this? If you insert a column, right, or if you insert a table, sorry, and you know how to add additional rows and columns, that'll honestly get you, I think, about 70 to 80% there when it comes to tables, right? Because that's just basic functionality. Obviously, things like formatting and changing settings, that is something, additional things. But if you can sort of get to the basics of inserting a table and then adding rows and columns, in all honesty, you should be okay there, right? That should be sufficient. Moving on. Now we can delete it. So we use a similar process to say like, okay, well, we don't need this many rows. I don't want this many sort of columns. I want to delete these. I don't really care, whatever. We could do that by selecting it, right? In this case, they're selecting the empty one at the complete bottom there, right? Then from the layout tab, we go to the delete button, click on that drop down, then click delete rows or delete columns from the menu, whichever one you're looking for. Then what we'll notice is sort of the selected row or column will be deleted. And we can also access the insert and delete commands by sort of right clicking a table. So let's go into this and see how this works, right? So again, we can go here, delete, let's say delete rows. So it deleted the row that was selected, right? So if we go here, we want to delete this bottommost one. Again, we can delete rows, and let's just delete Monday, so delete columns, right? And again, another thing worth noting, we can do it from here as well. So same thing, delete drop down, and then we have delete rows, columns, and also delete table, right? So if you ever want to apply any sort of modification and delete something, that's how you essentially go about doing so. So I hope that makes sense, right? Again, I hope it's nothing too crazy. It is pretty straightforward, I'd say. So that's how you go about doing so. Now we're talking about customizing tables, right? So PowerPoint does make it easy for us to customize sort of the look and feel of our tables. For example, we can quickly apply sort of different table styles and customize the table borders. And to apply a table style, we select any cell in our table, then click the Design tab on the right side of the ribbon. Then we locate the table styles group and click the More drop-down arrow to see the available styles. We can select the sort of desired style we want for our table. So again, very easy here. Nothing too crazy. So table design, now we see styles, right? So we have a whole list of styles we can sort of use. So essentially, if these presets are sufficient for you, you can definitely just select one and just run with it, right? So it really depends on you. Obviously, we do have sort of different sets of, I guess, changes or like these are presets, right? But we also have sort of individual settings that we can sort of interact with to sort of customize it more to our own preferences as opposed to just having sort of, I guess, for the lack of a better term, like a placeholder, right? So that is something we can also do, which we will get into, right? And it does give you that little bit of flexibility and creativity if that's something you definitely value, right? If not, then that's cool too. But again, it's just worth mentioning if you sort of have something you value. Um, Now we're talking about changing table style options. So we do have various, I guess, options on or off to change the appearance of sort of the table. There are several options like header, total row, banded rows, first column, last column, and banded cells, right? And we can select any cell in our table, and from the design tab, we can check or uncheck the desired options in the table style options group, right? And then sort of and then we could sort of like affect our table in various ways. Okay, so this is going to be a longer question, right? Because there are like 6 things. But what do we think header rows are, right? What do we think header rows are? What do these 6 rows and columns mean, everyone? What do we think? What do we think if we were to guess? Let's give it like 4 minutes because we do have like 6 different like columns and rows, right? Special types. So what do they mean? What do they do for us, everyone? Let's really think about and sort of try to get to an answer. But what do we think these 6 rows do? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? Or 6 rows and columns. What do we think each of these means for our table, everyone? What do we think? What do we think? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? What is a header row? Total row, banded row, first column, last column, and banded column. What does that do? What do we think that does? right, well, hopefully we understood. Let's break these down one by one. Well, let's just look at it, and I assume there are slides, but look. So we go here, we go to header row, right? So if we take this, it sort of removes like a sort of header row, right? So it sort of distinguishes, okay, this is the topmost row. And again, the header row is very, very sort of useful for like, okay, like again here, right? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Without this, right, it's hard to make that distinction. So everything blends together, right? But say this is a schedule, right? We can see Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but if we change it to a header row, it becomes a lot more pronounced, right? And we have first column as well. So just like the header row, it sort of blots out the first column. So we could create some level of distinction again, right? So if we have something here and something here, right, on the column side, again, it just creates that distinction and separation from the rest, right? Um, so then we have total rows. Um, so total rows is like at the end, right? I wonder what it means. Well, at the end, what I mean by total rows is that, okay, like counts, right? So if we do like 5, 7, 12, and then the last row sort of calculates the total of that sort of row, right? If that makes sense. Then we have like banded rows, which again, it's sort of, let me just add a column just to showcase or a row below, right? And now banded columns, what they do is they alternate sort of the color every other, um, or changes the color every column, right? So you see how this is dark gray, gray, dark gray, gray, right? Same thing with banded columns. It does the same thing, but for columns instead of rows. Then we have last column. So on the rightmost side, or on our last column, they'll have it blacked out. And the first column, same thing, right? Banded rows again. So hopefully that's helpful, right? But yeah. So hopefully that was an explanation. And now we can add borders, right? So we can add borders to help define different sections of a table. Certain table styles may include borders automatically, but it is easy to manually or customize them. Add them manually or customize them. We can control the border weight, color, and sort of line style for some or all of the table. We can select the cells where we want to add sort of borders as well. In our example, we'll select every cell in our table. Right in the front of the design tab, we select our sort of desired line style, line weight, right, and pen color, right? And then we click the borders drop down arrow, right? And then select our border type. So right here, and we have like no border, all border, outside border, inside border, top border, all that. So we select one, and then we can click draw table, right? And it will draw it. But if we want to remove the sort of borders, that's very, very easy to do as well. We just select it and then go to borders and then no border, right? So let's go here. Again, highlight, let's go to table layout, or sorry, table design. Or let's just, so select our pen color, let's just do dotted. 6-point for the sake of emphasis. And then we can go here and we go borders and sort of go all borders, right? And now I did this because it's noticeable, but that's how we did it, right? So that's the process of sort of adding borders. So again, we select our line type, select our thickness, and then just go to borders and sort of select an option. So top border, right? Bottom border, whatever, or we could just go all borders, right? And as you can see, we all sort of have borders, right? And again, these options for borders are self-explanatory, especially with the image. So all borders, again, every sort of line has a border. Outside borders, only the outside of a table. Inside borders, only these inner parts are sort of have a border. Then top border is at the top. Again, bottom border is sort of at the bottom. Left border is on the left, and then right. And then we have sort of different like diagonal down, diagonal up borders, and then horizontal and vertical borders, depending on what your needs essentially are, right? So that also depends. Now let's move on to our let's try section. All right, everyone, let's get into our let's try section for tables, right? Now, first question, or first, I guess, component, right? So we want to insert a table with 5 columns and sort of 3 rows. So again, we want to insert a table with 5 columns and 3 rows. How would we go about doing that, everyone? Again, if you have sort of PowerPoint open in front of you, I do want you to sort of attempt it yourself, right? Give it a try. And again, even if you don't, just think about it. But if I want to insert a table with 5 columns and 3 rows, how would I go about doing so? How could I do that? If I want to insert a column or a table with 5 columns and 3 rows, how did we do that in our lessons, everyone? Again, we'll give it 3 minutes for everyone to really give it an attempt themselves. How would we go about doing so, everyone? How could we do it? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? All right, let's go to insert, right? So if we want to insert a table, insert table. And again, 5 columns. I believe 5 columns like this, and then we need like 3 rows. So something like this, right? 5 by 3. Cool. And now let's just type sort of, I guess, uh, the months from January to May. So January, Feb, I probably spelled that incorrectly. Oh, it's just UARY. No. Let's just see. That's embarrassing. I never really spelled. Oh, it was the R. Okay, and then March, April, May, right? And now we need to type sale amount, so let's just go oops. Let's go here. Okay. So now we want to change sort of the overall style of the table, everyone. How could I go about doing so? Let's say I want to go with more of a, I guess, orangish hue. How could I go about doing so, everyone? How could I do that? How could I go about changing the style of my table? How could I do that, everyone? How could I do so? How could I do that? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think, everyone? How would we change the style of the table? What do we think? Well, style, again, very simple, right? So we click on this, go to table design, and then since we wanted an orange one, is that orange? Can we say it's orange? I mean, that's fine. We'll do that. Okay, cool. Now we want to insert sort of a column to the left side of the table, right? So theoretically, we want a column here. How could I go about doing that, everyone? How could I add a column there? How could I go about doing so, everyone? How could I do that? Again, we'll give it sort of a couple minutes for that, but how could I insert a new column, everyone? What are the two methods of inserting a column that we looked at? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do you think? All right, well, very easy. First method, we could just go here, right click, go to insert, and then column to the left. Same thing here, we could go to, I believe, table layout, and then insert column left, right? And now we just want to put North region, and we'll put South region here. Okay, cool. Right, now let's say, okay, you know what, maybe our schedule should be revised to not include May. How could we go about doing that, everyone? And again, if you have it in front of you, I want you to sort of follow along with me and try to attempt it yourself, right? So if I want to remove sort of the south, like May here, how could I go about doing that column? How could I go about removing that column, everyone? What do we think? What do we think? How could I go about removing that column? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? Okay, well, again, how do we delete it? Well, again, just right click it, delete, and then we delete the column. And there we go, perfect, right? And we want to resize. So resize, that's pretty straightforward. We know how to do that. You just resize it like this. So that's great there, right? Cool. Now we want to center our text horizontally and vertically. And if you remember, it wouldn't be in the paragraph tab. And this isn't something that we explicitly went over. Maybe we touched on it when we worked in Word, but we didn't talk about centering our text horizontally or vertically, right? So this is more of a question to keep everyone on their toes, so to speak. But how would I go about doing that, everyone? How could I sort of resize the table so that it takes up majority of the slide? Or not resize, sorry, whoops. Center our text horizontally and vertically, everyone. I saw, uh, but yeah, like how can we go about doing so? That's the next question, right? So we want to sort of, this text, it's all sort of, they're all, I guess, hiding in the top left corner, but we want it to be centered vertically and horizontally, right? So how can we go about doing so, everyone? How can we do that? Right, and let's give it a try. We'll give it 3 to 3.5 minutes because this isn't something we touched on. But again, if you have PowerPoint in front of you, I want you to try to find it yourself using what we've learned and your intuition And even if you don't, just try to really think about how we could do so. But how would we go about doing so, everyone? How could we center our text horizontally and vertically? How could we do that? What do we think? What do you think, everyone? What do we think? How would we go about doing so? What do we think? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? How could we go about centering our text horizontally and vertically? Well, what do we think? Well, okay, let's think about it, right? Let me walk you through sort of the, I guess, step by step mental process, right, of sort of finding something in PowerPoint. If you don't know explicitly where it is, but you have sort of a general inclination. So we know that we want to center text horizontally and vertically, and this won't really help, right? Because we're in a table, so we want it smack dab in the center, right? But how would we do that? Well, first we could check table design, right? Do we see anything related to centering here? Well, no. So that was our first guess, right? We thought sort of the formatting of the text would be in sort of table design. Well, it wasn't. Cool. No, maybe it's in table layout, right? Okay, well, this looks sort of similar. Let's look at our sort of groups here. Table, maybe not. Rows and columns, nothing. Merge, no. Cell size, no. But we have alignment. Okay, cool. Cool. So let's look at these settings. So align left. Okay, well, we want to align center. And we want to do that. Well, sure. Now we know it worked, but we need to apply it to all of them. So we can highlight this, we'll click center, and then center vertically. And now we've successfully centered it horizontally and vertically, right? So now this is sort of the look we're going for, right? Which is great. We've gotten that done. Now, final question, right? I want to add a border. Now, I want to add a border everywhere, so an all border, right? And I want it to be black dashed lines, right? So again, I want to add a border, and I want it to be black dashed lines. In terms of the weighting, we'll make it slightly thicker, but generally the main points are we want it black dashed lines, um, and an all border, right? So the question is, how would we go about doing that, everyone? So we'll give it another 2 to 3 minutes to sort of do that, and that's sort of our final, I guess, send off for working with tables in PowerPoint. But how do we go about doing so, everyone? How could we do that? How could we add an all border that's black, right, and has dashed lines? How could we go about doing so? What do we think? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think, everyone? All right, well, how do we do that? Well, again, very straightforward. Let's highlight this. Sorry, table design. Then we can sort of, okay, we want dotted lines. So that's cool. Let's add a little bit of thickness. Black lines. Okay, there we go. Now, how do I do borders? Well, I want an all border, right? So we go down to borders and click all borders. And now, as you can see, we have sort of our borders there, right? All right. So hopefully we better understand tables now. I have noticed that students tend to struggle with tables, and honestly, I understand why an individual would sort of struggle with tables. But I hope this did help and provide you with a little bit of context that makes it much, much easier to work with tables in PowerPoint, right? Ultimately, that was my goal. And if I provide a little bit of help and you learn how to work with sort of tables in PowerPoint, um, I have done my job, right? Because it is something that individuals may have trouble with, but I think the issue is we tend to overcomplicate it. So hopefully with these slides and then the subsequent let's try section, we understand it a lot better now. Moving on. All right, everyone. Moving on from sort of tables. Now we are going to be discussing, well, what are we going to be discussing? We're going to be discussing charts, right? So that's sort of the next thing we're going to cover, which is charts. Now, I guess ultimately, as always, I like to ask a question to sort of open up our minds and really get ready for the new topic, right, or lesson, however you may want to organize it. But then the question is, so we're talking about charts, right? So we'll just do a two-part question. So first off, what do we think the value in sort of having the ability to add charts into our presentation? What value do we think that provides, right? And next, what are some examples of charts, right? So two very simple questions, but again, since this is two-parter, we'll give it 3 minutes. But again, what value do we think having charts provides in PowerPoint? And also, what are some different types of charts you can see someone using in a slideshow, everyone? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? right. Well, okay. So charts, again, it's really the notion of PowerPoint sort of being a very, very visual medium, right? And in this case, charts are probably like the most, I guess, not, I don't want to say important, but like if someone were thinks of PowerPoint, right, in terms of like visual or like objects, they'd probably think either images or they think of charts, right? Because from my understanding, charts are at the very, very core of sort of the creation of PowerPoint, because I believe business individuals in sort of the business sector, when presenting, they want to sort of um, present like charts, right? Whatever, whatever. And before they used to have like, I believe it's like a light box, and you have sort of not a paper exactly, but it's like a see-through kind of plastic sheet that you write on with erasable marker, right? And then that would be reflected onto sort of a board or whatever. But then as we start to go more digital, there was a way to sort of have these charts and whatnot and graphics put up visually, right? And also, like, again, um, like they putting things such as charts, right? You're able to convey a lot of information in PowerPoint, right? So again, let's say your business, right, and you're trying to show off the sales by quarter over the year, right? Well, you could, I guess, in text write that out, right? That's one way to do it. But a better way to sort of, I guess, give that information is to directly just type it out, or sorry, make a chart, right? Plug in your data points, and then you're sort of um, your audience members will be able to just very, very quickly just understand what you're referring to, right? When they just look at the chart, right? And the fact that the chart sort of features built in, meaning that they don't have to sort of create a chart elsewhere and then bring it in, they could do everything in house. Some examples, well, let's just think of the basics, right? So we have the line chart, right? We have a bar graph. We have, say, even a pie graph. We can get really, really zany, and we can get things such as, say, like a 3D graph, right? And so by default, sort of Microsoft does provide us with a lot of different types of charts for a lot of different purposes, right? So it really just is a matter of what you would sort of like to do, right? So let's get right into it. So charts are a tool we can use again to communicate data graphically, right? A pretty powerful one at that. Um, so including a chart in our presentation allows our audience to see the meaning between numbers, which makes it easy to visualize comparisons and trends. PowerPoint does use a spreadsheet as a placeholder for entering the chart data, much like Excel, right? And how do we do this? Again, the Insert tab, right? Number one culprit, right? So we go to the Insert tab, then we click on the Chart command, and then a dialog box will appear. We select a category from the left pane and review the charts that appear in the right pane. Then we select the desired chart and click OK. Then we'll see a chart and spreadsheet that will appear. So if that data appears in the spreadsheet, it'll be placeholder data, so we can replace it with our own information, and the source data is used to create the chart. So once we insert our data into the worksheet, only the data enclosed by the blue lines will appear in the chart, but this area will automatically expand as you continue to type. And when you're done, click X to close the spreadsheet, right? So that's another thing worth sort of noting, right? Now we have another short question. So this spreadsheet module, if we were to guess, maybe we've seen it before, but what do we think it would be similar to? Right? What application do we think the spreadsheet that pops up would be similar to? Everyone, we'll give it a minute, minute and a half, but what do we think the spreadsheet here where we put in our source data, what do we think it would be similar to if we were to guess? What do we think? What do we think? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? Well, hopefully, if it sounds familiar, it's because it is, right? It'll be similar to like Excel, right? Because of course, Excel is Microsoft's property, but Excel is also sort of a proven method for inserting data. So why wouldn't Microsoft sort of use that, application, right? So that's what it is. This, and I'll show it, the spreadsheet that appears, it is sort of an Excel spreadsheet, right? So let's just go here. So again, where do we go? So let's create a new slide. Where do we go? We go to insert, chart, right? And we can search whatever chart. Let's go pie chart. Click OK, right? And then here's what we can see it. So as you can see, we see an Excel window open up, and we can add our numbers, right? So 10, 23, maybe you can see it changing, right? And as I mentioned, sort of, right? Let's edit data here, right? And as you can see, this blue thing here, that's the data that's typically going to be contained in our sort of PowerPoint, right? So that's what it means by sort of the blue tab. If you are wondering or a bit confused, but look, once we enter it, look, we've successfully created a chart, right? And again, through Excel, right? Which is relatively helpful, right? I think Excel is great at what it does, right? And a lot of people are familiar with it, so it's probably the best method to sort of to be able to work with it. But now it begs the question: what sort of interoperability do we think that if we were to guess that sort of the charts in PowerPoint have with Excel, if any, right? Do we think that sort of there is some sort of mechanisms in place in which we could sort of um, somehow sort of interact with PowerPoint and Excel, right? What do we think, everyone? Like, how do we think maybe having data in an Excel sheet and having a chart, how do we think that could sort of interact with each other, everyone? What do we think in PowerPoint? We'll give this question another 2 minutes, but what do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think, everyone? What do you think? What sort of Do we think there's a way we could somehow get PowerPoint and sort of Excel to interact with each other? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think, everyone? All right. Well, if we think about the interoperability, right? So let's go edit data. Well, first off, we can copy paste sort of data directly from Excel into our PowerPoint if we just want to do that, right? So that's one very simple example. Otherwise, I believe there is a way to sort of link an Excel file, right? So we could potentially go here and then open a file, right? And sort of load it as well, right? And from my understanding, it will automatically sync as well. So that's sort of another thing to note is that if you are, say, in a business heavy discipline where you're working with a lot of data, uh, you could potentially use PowerPoint or your Excel data in PowerPoint either by copy and pasting it or you could link it, right? So that's another thing to consider. But another thing to consider is that you may be asked to create, say, like a dashboard using Power BI to sort of create visualizations there. So that's another sort of consideration as well, instead of linking Excel um, with um, with what do you call it? With PowerPoint, right? So we've covered this. Now, like, if we already have data in an existing Excel file we want to use for a chart, we can simply transfer the data by copy pasting it. So again, once we copy our spreadsheet in Excel, then we select and copy the desired data, right, and then paste it into the source data area for our chart. We can also embed an existing Excel chart into our PowerPoint presentation, and this may be useful when we know we'll need to update the data in our Excel file and want the chart to automatically update whenever the Excel data is changed, right? So that's what I was referring to, linking it with Excel Live. So of course we can copy paste, but if we need like a live connection, we could also do that, right? So now we're talking about modifying charts, right? So we know how to create charts now at a basic level in PowerPoint. Again, it's not anything too crazy or too complex, right? But now let's say we want to customize it, right? So there are a lot of ways to sort of customize and organize our charts. For example, PowerPoint allows us to change the chart type, rearrange a chart's data, and even change the layout and style of a chart. So to change a chart type, if you find that your data isn't working with a certain chart, it's easy to switch to a new chart type. In our example, we'll change our chart from a column chart to a line chart. Now, how do we do this? Right? We select the line or the chart, sorry, that we want to change. We click on it, and then again, we go on the design tab. So again, we're probably noticing, hey, this is very similar to like images, audio, video, right? Or any object like that, which it is, right? So it is, right? Because like for a lot of these process with objects, um, Microsoft has sort of standardized the same sort of process. While like each medium, like let's say video and an image, they might have different sort of considerations, but generally sort of the menus, like the design and format, they're all tabs, they're all the same, right? Apart from exclusives commands, that is, right? And from the design tab, we can click change chart type, right? Right here. And then a dialog box will appear, and we can select the desired chart type we want and then click OK, right? So again, we go here. Let's say, okay, this doesn't work, right? I'm already in chart design. Click change chart type, and let's do a bar graph. Right, and now it's sort of changed, right? So that's another thing worth considering. If you find like, hey, like this chart is definitely not working, I want to switch it, you could switch it in one click without having to re-enter the data, which is something that might go a little bit like unseen or unmentioned, but that is worth mentioning there, right? We can also switch row and column data, right? So sometimes we may want to change the way charts group our data. For example, in the chart below, the book sales data is grouped by genre with lines for each month. However, we could switch the rows and columns so the chart will group the data by month with lines for each genre. And in both cases, the chart contains the same data, it's just organized differently. So to do this, we select the chart we want to modify, then we open the Design tab. Then from the Design tab, we can select the Edit Data command in the command group, and we click the chart again, and we click Switch Row or Column, right? And the columns and rows will be switched, right? Because now before it was grouped by months, right? Or now it's sort of grouped by month with lines for each genre as opposed to the other sort of method, right? So let's just switch it around here. So again, select data, right? And we can just click switch row column, right? So we see how it just changes, right? Depending on sort of the method, right? So that's one thing worth mentioning, right? Now we're talking about chart layout. So obviously predefined chart layouts allow us to modify chart elements, including chart titles, legends, and data labels to make our chart easier to read. But we could sort of add, like, I guess, preset templates to our graphs to change the way they sort of appear, right? So how do we do this? Well, we select the chart we want to modify, and then we'll go to the Design tab. And from the Design tab, we click on Quick Layout, and then we can select the desired predefined layout from the menu that appears, and the chart will sort of update, right? So let's say, okay, I don't like this. Let's change this, right? So if I go Quick Layout, now I can get ones with like, and if you hover over, you can see what it contains, right? But you can see much different formats, right? But now, ultimately, the question is, if I want to say, like, let's just revert to a normal graph like this. Let's say I want to add a specific element, like maybe like a legend down here, or like another sort of element. How could I go about adding that, right? Because maybe I'm working and I'm like, okay, well, these layouts, frankly, I don't want some of these, right? But I want to be able to pick and choose which elements I sort of have. If we were to guess, everyone, how do we think we could do that? How do we think we could individually add sort of elements to our chart without relying on a template, everyone, if we were to guess? We'll give it 3 minutes, but really let's think about this. But how would I go about doing so, everyone? How could I do it? think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? Well, we could do that. Now, obviously, I do believe we do discuss it, but I did want to show it regardless because I want to pose that question, right? For everyone to think about it. Well, it's right here, add chart element. So quick layout, what it does is it takes a bunch of, I guess, preset chart elements and it adds them. Like, for example, this added like a table at the bottom, right? Like chart title table, right? But also, it comes, most of these predefined templates come with other things that we may not want, right? So if we really want to be particular with sort of, I guess, a chart, right, and customize it to our liking, we can click on the add chart element and individually add things, right? So like an axis, whether we want like a primary horizontal and vertical, right? Axis titles, right? Whether we want it or not. Again, chart titles, location, whether we have one, data labels, where it is, right? Maybe a table with a legend key, right? No legend key, right? Error bars, if we need that, grid lines, right? So hopefully this makes a lot more sort of sense, right? Of course, it does really see a lot of value when you're working with more particular types of graphs, right? Or more complex types of graphs. And that's where things like even like adding like maybe like a trend line is really important, right? Legends, right? All these sorts of things, right? So yes, quick layout, just think of them as like predefined templates where if like you go and you look at, okay, these are exactly the elements I need or want, you can go ahead and just use that. There's no issue with using it. But if you want a more particularly, I guess, how do you say it's customized graph, you could definitely use a chart element here. And that's probably the best way of sort of doing so, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Moving on. Now let's move on to our let's try section. All right, everyone. So let's get into our let's try section for sort of tables, right? So the first thing is, okay, so we have a spreadsheet here, right, that we want to derive data from, right, um, for our chart, right? So I guess the first question is, we want to insert a line chart um, into our, what do you call it? Sorry, I'm blanking. Into our slide, right? So how would I create a line chart and then use the data from our Excel spreadsheet in the chart, everyone? How could I go about doing that? We'll give it 3 minutes for everyone to sort of give it a try, but how could I go about doing so, everyone? How could I do it? How could I go about doing so? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? How could I insert a line chart into my sort of slide and then use the data from our Excel file to populate that line chart? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? Well, let's do this, right? So again, our first intuition is sort of the insert tab, of course, right? Because as we remember, if we want to insert any sort of object into our slides, we use the insert tab. So insert, then we go to chart, right? And then chart, we could go line. So let's go something like this. Okay, cool. Our spreadsheet opens up. Well, we have our Excel file here. So let's just go here. Let's copy this, copy, right? And then we could sort of paste it here, right? And now, as you can see, it auto-expanded and populated our chart for us, which is frankly great, very, very helpful, right? And as you can see, again, column 1, then we have sort of our classics, right? January, February, March, April, May, June, along with sort of dollar figures for each. So that's perfect. We're very much happy with that. Now, we want to sort of change the title of the chart, or sort of remove the chart titles, or remove the chart from our, like remove this, right? How would we go about doing that, everyone? So we see the chart title here, right? Does anyone have any guesses as to how we could change this so the chart title does not appear, or it's not there anymore, everyone? How could we do that? Right, because technically speaking, we don't need a chart title here because we already have technically the slide title here do the work for us, right? So monthly sales here does the same thing as putting it here, right? And also if we just had monthly sales, well then there'd be no need, right? We don't need to do that. So how would we sort of get rid of this chart title, everyone? What do we think? What are some potential methods we can think of sort of removing it? Because I can definitely think of two. What do we think? We'll give it 2.5 minutes to really just think about this question. Again, if you have this sort of, if you have PowerPoint open in front of you, try to follow along and try to do it yourself. Even if you don't have sort of the Excel file, just try to follow the general process, right? So what do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? Okay, well, let's take a look, right? So first guess, obviously, we could just click on it and remove it, right? And you see it expands. However, that's the easy way. And honestly, if you use that, that's completely fine, right? It's the easy way, it's the intuitive way. You could do that. You could just delete. Alternatively, let's try something. Let's go chart design, chart element, and let's see if we can, this might be incorrect. There may not be sort of a chart title here, right? And we could just click on none, chart title, and it's the same effect. Now, 9 times out of 10, what are you probably doing? Are you going to the add chart element or here? You're probably going here and just pressing delete, which is completely fine. You could do that, right? That's a completely valid way of sort of doing it. But again, if you did want to sort of add another chart element while you're at it and sort of remove one, then you can just do this, right? Okay, cool. Now we want to change the chart type. I've decided as a business owner, okay, this line graph is not what I want at all. I think a stacked column would work better, right? I think it would get the point across in the manner I want. Um, and it's just overall sort of a better option, right? Now, how would we do that, everyone? How would we change our chart type to a stacked column? How could we go about doing so, everyone? We'll give this one, again, just 2 to 3 minutes, but how could I go about doing that? How could I change it to a stacked column? How could I go about doing so? What do we think? What do we think? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? How could I change the chart type to stacked column? What do we think, everyone? Well, how would we do it? Well, we need to click on it, right? Chart design, and then go to chart type, right? And we can change it. So we want a column. So this is clustered, not what we want. Stacked column, here we go. There it is, right? That's exactly what we want. Now, let's say we want a preset, right? We want to change our sort of graph to preset 10, right? Because we're like, okay, like this is the one we identify with. This is definitely sort of the preset I'd like for my chart, right? Because this is the only one that works. This is going to be great. How would I go about doing that? How could I change my graph to layout 10? How could I go about doing so? And this one's a little bit shorter, so we'll give it 2 minutes for this. But what do we think? How could we change it to layout 10, everyone? How could we go about doing so? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? think, everyone? Well, how do we do that? Well, again, click on it. Chart design. We can go to quick layout, and we want layout 10. So layout 10 is just this, right? Perfect. Okay, so now we do kind of want an access title, right? Access title, sorry. Like right here, we want something to like, I guess, explain what these numbers are, right? Which is definitely just reasonable, right? In the context of a graph, right? So now, how could I add an axis title here? Because I want a primary and vertical axis title. So how could I go about doing so, everyone? How could I do that, right? I want an axis title here to explain sort of what these numbers here mean, right? To give better context for our chart here. So how would I go about doing so? How would I do that, everyone? What do we think? How could I go about doing so? We'll give it a couple minutes for that question, but what do we think? How would I go about doing so? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? How could I add a primary axis or primary vertical axis title? What do we think? Well, how do we do it? Well, again, very, very simple, right? Again, what do we do? So we go here, right? Chart design, add chart element. We go axis titles, and we could go primary vertical. And let's just add sales profits. Yeah, okay, right. Okay, that's correct, yeah. Just so now you see how this has sort of context, right? And I think we could increase the size a little bit. I mean, doesn't really help unless we maybe stretch now. Okay, cool. Finally, Now, maybe we want to sort of um, switch our row and sort of column data. Well, now, how could we go about doing that, right? How could we go about doing that? Well, that one's easy, right? So I'll just give it. So again, we click on our chart design, and we can edit data, right? Let's click switch and edit column, right? And now you see how it sort of changes, right? If we just change the column, right? And change the way the chart looks, right? So if we ever want to do that, that's how you'd go about doing so, right? But hopefully that was charts. Again, relatively speaking, it's pretty basic, but there are a lot of different functionalities you can sort of use um, for your presentations. Let's just look for any other things. We covered this. We can change colors as well. So like first off, they offer us color palettes, right? Or we could just do a color. Again, we have chart styles. We've covered these, right? Then we also have formatting, right? So we can format like individual elements. We can insert shapes if we'd like, right? Uh, we could add like shape styles or styles for the actual like chart itself. Um, you can obviously add like a shape fill, outline, right? And shape is referring to the actual graph, right? We could add alt text. So alt text, I don't think we've mentioned it. A lot of people ignore it, but it's for accessibility, right? So if an individual is reading your slides with what we call a screen reader, if they say maybe visually impaired, I believe the alt text describes the chart, right? So if you do care about accessibility, you can use alt text. And then, of course, for formatting, bring forward, send backward. But we also have like the selection pane and whatnot. But that was sort of our section on charts. Again, as I mentioned, charts are relatively important, or at least it's at the heart of sort of PowerPoint, right? And knowing how to use charts, especially in a business context, will take you very, very far, right? Because they are useful tools for conveying a lot of sort of good information, right? Um, but yeah, that said, moving on. All right, everyone. So having covered sort of charts, our next intuitive jump now is to what we call smart art graphics, right? So that's what we're sort of covering next, right? Smart art graphics. Okay, so now, again, I like to start each section off with a question, right? And in this case, for smart art questions, um, it's pretty simple. Like, what is smart art, right? And like, what's its purpose in the context of, I guess, PowerPoint, right? And what can we use smart art for, right? Um, and again, this is a very open-ended question because you can legitimately use smart art for a lot of different things, right? But what do we think, everyone? What is smart art and what could we potentially use it for? So we'll give it 3 minutes to really think about this. To those of you that did sort of the word module, you may remember, right? But what do we think, everyone? What do we think? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? Thank you, everyone. Okay, well, let's get into it, right? So, again, what is smarter? So, again, I've repeated this possibly, I think, even for the last 3 sections, I've repeated it every time, but I've repeated it multiple times over sort of the course of the um, module, right? But again, smarter is sort of another way of, I guess, organizing information using sort of a graphical means, right? So again, it allows us to communicate information with graphics instead of just text. And there are a variety of styles we could choose from, which we can use to illustrate different types of ideas, right? So to insert a smart art graphic, we select the slide where we want the smart art graphic to appear, right? And then from the Insert tab, we select the Smart Art command, the Illustrations group, right? Then a dialog box will appear, so we simply just need to select a category, choose a desired Smart Art graphic, then click OK. The Smart Art graphic will appear on the current slide. Another thing worth noting is we can also click the Insert a Smart Art graphic command sort of inner placeholder um, to do that, right? But there are multiple ways. So again, just to reiterate, a smart art graphics are sort of a way of sort of communicating certain information graphically, right? In terms of some uses, well, we could do something like a hierarchy, right? Let me give you a scenario. Let's say we're in a company and we want to show what the new corporate leadership structure is like. We could use a hierarchy, right? So again, at the top here, we could have a CEO. Here we have like CTO, CFO. Then we have like executive managers, and then so on and so forth, right? For like a process, if we want to sort of let's say I'm a teacher and I want to organize and I want to outline, okay, um, this is how work should be submitted, right? Like this is the process. First you need to do a rough draft, submit that, then you need a final draft, submit that, and then you'll get their mark. You could use a process, right? So basically it's a really important, just I guess, method of conveying information um, using a graphic, right? Make it easier to digest rather than outright writing it. So let's get into it. Let's show you. New slide, then we go to insert, as always, right? Smart art, right? As you can see, we have a lot here. We can organize by types, like we have a list, we have a process. So this is a step-by-step, and we just click OK and sort of insert it, right? And now we have sort of um, our smarter, right? And now let's open a new side. You want to talk about like placeholders, right? So we could go here. When we look for it, I believe this is smarter. So we click on this, then the same menu opens up and we can open another one, right? And now you can see we clearly have sort of a like a graphic, right? And now let's say I wanted to do a process. I could be like, okay, well, this is the first step, this is the second step, third step, fourth step, right? And again, we see how good this is at conveying information, right? Because it's fundamentally a really good graphic to use. So there is that. And that's sort of how you simply create one or insert a smarter graphic, right? But again, another thing I want you to consider is that realistically, sky's the limit. When it comes to smart art, we have so much variety in sort of the ways we can convey information. Um, that I honestly think you'd be hard pressed to find like an example of a graphic um, that doesn't sort of like finding a graph like not finding a graphic that doesn't express what you're thinking in here, right? You'd probably find it in all honesty. Um, but yeah, it's very, very thorough, right? And that's pretty good for us, right? Lots of diversity. Um, and again, just having the option to overall just change the, I guess, aesthetic of um, of our graphic is also really, really strong. Now we can add text, right? So I didn't go into it, but say like our cycle, right? Or even here, we want to add text, right? Because before, as we know, we just see text, text, text. So it's just placeholder, but we want to insert text. Well, how do we do that? So each text next to, once we click on our smart art, right, we'll have something open, and you probably noticed it when I was going through, is that the text pane will open up. So in the text pane, we can enter the text next to each bullet in the text pane, and the text will appear in the corresponding shape. And then it will be resized automatically to fit inside the shape. We can also add text by clicking the desired shape and then typing, and this works well if you only need to select a few shapes. However, for more complex smart art graphics, working the text pane is often easier. Okay, so let's go here. Let's do, and we see it auto adjust, right? Where's our text pane? Right here. We can open it up by going to text pane, and now we see it, right? We can click and type it, but we can also go here. Right, and there we go, right? So that's how you simply just insert text. It's pretty straightforward, to be honest. Yeah, right. Now, the question is ultimately, so actually, let me provide a new example. Let's do a new slide. So it's clear that some of these smart art graphics have a sort of hierarchy system. So let's do this, right? So all right, so here, look, like we have a hierarchy. Let me just verify this in the next slide. Yes, okay. So let's say we have like a hierarchy, right? But we want to make adjustments. So right now we have CEO, CFO, right, and a manager, manager, manager. How do you think potentially, what do we think the process is? If we were to think about it, let me open up the text pane again. What do we think the process is for putting CFO and CEO on the same level and then having all three managers under? Or, I guess for a broader term to describe my question, how do you think we'd be able to rearrange or reorder these shapes around, right? Or like move it in different locations? How do you think we could go about doing that, everyone? Hopefully my question makes sense. But let's say we want to change the order in which all these shapes here are arranged. How do you think I could go about doing so, everyone? How could I do that? Think about it, right? And if you have it in front of you, like a PowerPoint open in front of you, try to give it a try yourself and try to figure out, but how do you think I'd be able to do it, everyone? How could I do that potentially? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think, everyone? What do we think, everyone? What do you think, everyone? think one. All right, well, let's take a look, right? Because this is a pretty important question, right? So we can reorder, add, and delete shapes. And why is this very important? Well, it is, right? Now, if we think about the reasoning, it's because in a lot of these systems with these shapes, we want to be able to move them around, right? Especially like one such case is, again, this hierarchy system, right? If we want to better organize it, we want to be able to completely reorder, add, and sort of delete shapes, right? So one thing to note is that it is easy to add new shapes, change their order, and even delete shapes from your SmartArt graphic. We can do all of this in the text pane, and it's a lot like creating an outline with a multi-level list, right? To demote a shape, select the desired bullet, then press the tab key, and then the bullet will move to the right and the shape will move down one level, right? And to promote a shape, we select the desired bullet, press the backspace key or shift tab, right? And the bullet will move to the left, right? And the shape will move up one level, right? To add a new shape, place the insertion point after the desired bullet, then press enter, right? And a new bullet will now appear in the text pane, and a new shape will appear in the graphic. And to remove a shape, keep pressing backspace until the bullet is deleted. The shape will then be removed. In our example, we'll delete the shape without the text. Okay, so again, just to summarize, it's much like creating an outline with the multi-level list, right? So demote the tab or a shape, we select the desired bullet, then press the tab key, right? The bullet will move down to the right and the shape will move down one level. To mode a shape, we select the desired bullet and press backspace, right? And the bullet will move to the left, right? And up one level. Then to add a new shape, we place the insertion point after the desired bullet, then press enter, and a new bullet will appear in the text pane, and a new shape will appear in the graphic. And then to remove a shape, we keep pressing backspace until the bullet is deleted, and the shape will then be removed. And in our example, we're sort of deleting it. So again, what does this remind us of? As it's mentioned in the slide, it's similar to a multi-level list. So let's get into it. Right, so let's go CFO. If we press Shift Tab, you see how now they're sort of on equal footing, right? And then, okay, cool, right? And now we have sort of the CFO and CEO on sort of equal footing. We all press Tab to sort of create a further level of indentation. So again, we see how it's like starting to hopefully operate like a multi-level list. Let's take this manager, so it's backspace to delete this. Let's add, say the CEO has, let's just tab here, and then manager, 3 managers under them. Right? And then so the CFO has a manager, and that one has a manager as well, right? But like, yeah, like that's how you could see it, right? Some sort of, I guess, hierarchy. Okay, let's try to change it a bit. So we have CFO, manager, and then let's say we want the manager to have 2 individuals beneath him. So employee 1, employee 2, right? Okay, cool, right? So then we sort of see, right? Now let's just add it for every manager, right? So how do we do that? Again, tab and just paste, right? Right? And then here we'll just, right? And we'll just tab these, right? right? So now hopefully we can see a more of a better system, right? We've already organized it. And again, one thing to remember, it's just like a multi-level list, right? In terms of like reordering and moving shapes around. So that's one thing to consider and remember. Um, Obviously, they are still a bit finicky to work with, right? But that's completely fine. That's not too big of an issue, I'd say. And now we can organize smart art. So if we don't want to use the text pane to organize our smart art, we can do it another method, and that's by using the commands on the Design tab in the Create Graphic group. So we just select the shape we want to modify and then choose the following command. So we can go promote or demote. So we can use these commands to move a shape up or down between levels. We can move up or down and use these commands to change the order of the shapes on the same level. And then we have add shape, which allows us to add a new shape to our graphic. And we can also click the drop down arrow for more exact placement options. So in terms of what that looks like, right, let's go like this, and it would look like, if we select one, we can promote it. So move it above or demote, right to left, right. We can move after, right, if you want to change. So, or you can promote it up, right. So we see how that works. Pretty straightforward. We can change the layout. Let's go back. So that's another thing we can do. Right, and let's go both. Right, and then we can see how we sort of shift it up from there as well. So we can use the promote, demote, before and after if we don't want to sort of use the tab or shift keys as well. This is more sort of intuitive, and if you don't like using keyboard commands anyways, then this is probably your best bet, right? So that's another thing worth considering. Now, we can customize our smart art, right? So after inserting the smart art, there are several things we might want to change about its appearance. And whenever we select a smart art graphic, the design and format tabs will appear on the right side of our ribbon. From here, it is typically easy to edit the style and layout of a smart art graphic. And there are several smart art styles which allow us to quickly modify the look and feel of our smart art. And to change the style, select the desired style from the Smart Art Styles group. We have a variety of color schemes to use with Smart Art, and to change the color, we can click the Change Colors command and choose our option. We can also customize each shape independently if we'd like, just by selecting any shape in the graphic, then choosing the desired option from sort of the Format tab, right? So how do we do that? Again, Smart Art Design. Then we can select sort of a style, and we can always just click here and change colors, right? So we can go here, right, and select any one of these, or we can recolor sort of things if we'd like, right? And then again, just select your preset that you're more than happy with, right? And that's pretty straightforward, right? Again, just giving that level of customizability that you may need or sort of want as well, right? We can also change the layout. So if we don't like the way the information is organized within sort of our smart art graphic, we can always change its layout to better fit our content. So from the design tab, we can click on the more drop down arrow in the layouts group, and we can select on the desired layout or choose more layouts to see more and select the one you like, right? So let's go here. Let's go to layouts. Maybe I want it different. Maybe I want like an image, right? So I can dedicate the picture. We could do that, right? There's more here, right? Again, just different styles of doing it, all organized in sort of a better way. I guess not better, but a more like a different manner, right? Its use does depend on you. I do like this one, right? But we can also go to more layouts and again, see the full list, right? But again, layouts, it's just think of it like just more customization options for your diagram, like different ways to convey it. Perhaps this is a better way of sort of organizing the overall company hierarchy, right? So it really depends on your uses. Some may be better than others. Like even this, I'd say is much better than our original one, right? So if we compare this, like this is a little bit confusing, whereas if we go if we go to like something like this, it's a lot more easy to understand, right? Because like CEO, then we have 3 managers, and each manager has 2 employees, right? So a lot easier to understand than what we had before, where it was a little bit harder to follow and whatnot, right? So again, do experiment. Don't really stick to one layout. You want to try things, experiment, and see whichever ones you like or you feel like do generally work best for the sake of your presentation, right? So that's another thing worth sort of considering as well, right? Moving on. And now we have our let's try section. So let's give that an attempt.